Hey everyone, in today's video I want to go over my Luna AOE build. Over the last couple of days I've written up a document going over everything for this build. This build takes advantage of Noise Surge, one of the red mods for Luna. When using skills, deal damage to nearby enemies but doesn't buff allies. But this allows you to grant buffs to yourself instead. Each skill is exactly the same, apart from their buff at the bottom. So for the first one, you get Largo. Every single stack you gain 1% on your base. So this adds 26 critical hit rate to Luna's base of 15%. And these Largo stacks are applied before mods, meaning it increases your critical hit rate even higher. The third skill increases your skill critical hit damage. At 26 stacks you gain the 26%. And for your fourth skill you gain Forte, which gives it skill power modifier 1% per stack up to 26 stacks, so 26% at full stacks. Now it totally depends on how you actually want to play this build, but the main one you want to focus on is your first, as it gives you the skill critical hit rate, and this allows you to deal more damage as you're going to be critting more often. If you want the difficult version of this, you can actually play Luna and have all 26 stacks for each skill, which means you'll deal even more damage, but that takes a lot of skill and practice to do, and I don't think it's entirely worth doing, especially if you're more of a casual player. You're kind of just wanting to spam one skill. Now for my build, I've done the calculations for the critical hit rate, as this is the skill that you'll mainly be wanting to be using. So for the Descendant mods, I have skill concentration for the skill critical hit damage, emergency measures for the skill critical hit rate and the skill critical hit damage, front lines for skill critical hit damage and skill critical hit rate, skill expansion for the skill effect range. Then we have multi-talented, which gives us plus 30% attribute damage for 5 seconds, and this is triggered every single time you hit your skill, which means you have this up constantly. And every single skill that you have is singular, which means this works for all skills. Then you have maximize skill for the skill power, and maximize power for the skill power modifier. With this build, the more skill power modifier you have, the better, as your skill power modifier is very low for this build. As you can see, you only get 252.8% and then 256.8%, so the enhanced one only gives 4% extra. Now if you find yourself missing the notes often, like you're playing the actual character and you accidentally miss it, you gain the cooldown, and the cooldown lasts for a very long time, and this cooldown is for on-note failure. So with the extra cooldown we have 30 seconds. So obviously if you don't want the extra cooldown, you can take non-attribute specialist, or focus on non-attribute for the skill power, while also lowering your skill cooldown. And then instead of maximize power, you can take singular specialist or focus on singular, or you can even take technician if you want, but that has even lower skill power modifier when we want to max it out as high as possible. This is why I take these both for the extra skill cooldown anyway. As me personally, I'm not going to miss a note while playing Luna, so I don't mind having the extra plus 50% skill cooldown on these. Then non-attribute Synctium, this gives you the extra 10.2 skill power, and then Iron Defense, this gives skill power modifier plus 12.7 while also giving us a little bit of defense, and then increased HP for the obvious more health for survivability. The reason we want skill power modifier over skill power is because of the low skill power modifier we have on this character. When you look at other characters like Lepic, he has a very high skill power modifier, which means you don't need skill power modifier on him. Same with Haley, you don't need skill power modifier either. But with characters with very low skill power modifier, you want to obviously build this up as high as possible. So an example with Iron Defense, we can use our first ability, and you see we get 732,000. Now if we switch it for Spear and Shield, and you'll see that we only get 726,000. So we want skill power modifier. But Iron Defense and Spear and Shield entirely depend on how you build the rest of your build, as you want to have a balance of skill power and skill power modifier for this one. Now when testing this, I was actually contemplating even having skill expansion and instead just taking skill insight, putting this in instead. As you can see with Luna, we only have 28.8% skill critical hit rate, and when we have skill insight on, we can boost our skill critical hit rate all the way up to 100% by using our second ability and gaining the Largo stacks. With this build, when I had the 26 stacks of Largo from the second skill, we actually have up to 78% skill critical hit rate. Adding skill insight only brings us up to 100%, but I don't think it's important to even have that, as 80% skill critical hit rate is good as it is, and using a reactor with skill critical hit rate can even increase the critical hit rate from 78% all the way up to 92.25. The math I'd done behind the second skill was the base critical hit rate is only 15, meaning if I take off both crit rate mods, you'll see that my crit rate is at 15%, that's the base for Luna. And whenever I use the second skill, Exciting Surge, we gain the Largo stacks, and that goes up to 26% at full 26 stacks. So before we have any modifiers on, the critical hit rate goes up to 41%, and this is on your base stats, which means this can be modified with mods on your Descendant, as the Largo stacks are additive and not multiplicative. As for the modifiers, Frontline gives 27.7%, so as you can see it gives 27.7%. So when we do 41% times 1.277, this gives us 52.36, which means Frontlines adds 11.36% to the base of 41%. And this is with the stacks applied. So if we go into our stacks now, you'll see that we only have 19.155. But if we gain all 26 stacks of Largo from our first skill, you'll see if we go into the settings, we have 52.357, which is almost identical to what I've calculated. And then if we do a separate calculation for emergency measures, this one adds 64.6%, which means we do 41 times 1.646, which gives us 67.49, which means we gain 26.49. So emergency measures adds 26.49% to the base of 41%. And then the summary is, without mods or Largo stacks we have 15%, with the Largo stacks we have 41%, then with Frontlines we gain the extra 11%, which takes us up to 52.36. And then separately, if we do emergency measures on top of the base, so we add 26.49 to 41, we go up to 67.49. And then if we do the total calculation of the critical hit rate, we do 41% plus 11 from the front lines, and then plus 26 from the emergency measures. This takes us up to 78.85. So if we add both crit rates back, you'll see that we're at 28.8%. Then if we gain all stacks of Largo from the first skill, you will see that we have 78.843% skill critical hit rate. That's the main calculations of this actual build. I did start doing some calculations for the skill expansions, and I was going to do calculations for every other mod as well. For Luna's build, I could spend the time doing it, but I feel like it's a waste of time, and instead I can just focus on the main things that are important. So this is the actual build. Skill concentration, front lines, skill expansion, emergency measures, multi-talented, maximize skill, maximize power, non-attribute Sanctum, iron defense, and increased HP. Then obviously noise surge to actually use the skills. For the reactor, you can use any weapon you want. For the mountain, for the extra 60% skill power, then you want non-attribute and singular for the skill power boost ratio, and then for the bottom stats you want skill critical hit damage and skill critical hit rate. And then when you have a good skill critical hit rate, you can actually boost your 78% all the way up to 92%. So for example, if I put this critical hit rate on it for just an example real quick, I'll have very little damage, but you'll be able to see the actual crit rate when I go into the stats menu. So I'm at 26 stacks, and you see I'm at 92.25. Obviously you don't want to be using a toxic reactor with terrible stats, as you'll be dealing literally no damage. And then for the components, you obviously want Slayer for the skill power. Skill cost doesn't matter, because you're able to actually gain all of your MP back when you use an enhanced skill. So on the Slayer set, you want MP recovery out of combat and max HP, MP recovery in combat max MP, defense, then MP recovery modifier, and then shield recovery modifier and max MP. The weapon does not matter, you only need the actual mounting for the skill power. And then depending on how advanced you want to play the build, you can either do 1 skill, 2 skills, or 3 skills and gain all stacks. For the more casual people, you probably just want to use the second skill for the crit rate. So obviously you're running around and you press your second skill whenever the notes appear so that you can gain your resource. Then when you gain your resource, you deal slightly more damage, but whenever you use that enhanced skill, you gain your MP back instantly, which means that you do not have any MP issues. And this is basically how you play this character. If you're wanting to play more casually, you still deal a decent amount of damage. As you can see, I'm getting 655,000 and 732,000. Now if you want to play more advanced, you can gain stacks for 2 skills or even 3 skills. The way you do this is by gaining stacks for one of them. The only issue with playing like this is that you have to pay attention to the cooldown of your actual stacks. So when you have 26 stacks of the second skill, you want to move on to the next one to start gaining stacks on that as well. And you want to periodically go to the second skill to refresh the cooldown so that you can keep the 26 stacks up. But you want to try again the other 26 stacks on the third skill. But you only need to press the other skill once for it to refresh the cooldown. Once you're at 26 stacks on both of them, you can now move to the fourth skill and just do the same. Just making sure that you keep track of the other cooldowns so that you can keep both of them up. And then when you're at 26 stacks on everything, you can just keep switching between all three, as this is slightly easier to keep it up. And this is how you basically play the most advanced version of Luna's AoE build. And I'm getting upwards of 860,000. The only issue with the cooldown is whenever you come into your first ability, it takes forever to actually cooldown, and whenever you teleport inside of like invasions and stuff, you also have this extra cooldown on your first, so it might not be best to use these maximize modules. That's entirely up to you and how you actually build your Luna. If you found the video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, it will help the channel a lot. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.